Part 2. The walls and ceiling of the room were perfectly black with age and dirt. There was a clothes horse over which a great number of silk handkerchiefs were hanging, and a deal table before the fire upon which were a candle stuck in a ginger beer bottle, 2 or 3 pewter pots, a loaf and butter, and a plate. In a frying pan, which was on the fire, some sausages were cooking, and standing over them with a toasting fork in his hand was a very old shriveled Jew, whose villainous-looking and repulsive face was obscured by a quantity of matted red hair. Several rough beds, made of old sacks, were huddled side by side on the floor. Seated round the table were 4 or 5 boys, none older than Jack Dawkins, familiarly called the Dodger. The boys all crowded about their associate as he whispered a few words to the old man, and then they turned around and grinned at Oliver. So did the old man himself, toasting fork in hand.
"This is him, Fagin,"
said Jack Dawkins.
"My friend Oliver Twist."
The old man, making a low bow to Oliver, took him by the hand and hoped he should have the honour of his intimate acquaintance. Upon this, the young gentleman came round him and shook his hand very hard, especially the one in which he held his little bundle.
"We're very glad to see you, Oliver. Dodger, take off the sausages and draw a tub near the fire for Oliver. Ah, you're staring at the pocket handkerchiefs. There are a good many of them, ain't there? We've just got them out and ready for the wash. That's all, Oliver, that's all."
The latter part of his speech was hailed by a boisterous shout from the boys, who, Oliver found, were all pupils of the merry old gentleman, in the midst of which they went to supper. Oliver ate his share, and the old man Fagin then mixed him a glass of hot gin and water, telling him he must drink it off directly because another gentleman wanted the tumbler. Oliver did as he was desired. Immediately afterwards, he felt himself gently lifted on to one of the sacks, and then he sunk into a deep sleep. It was late next morning when Oliver awoke from a sound, long sleep. There was no other person in the room but old Fagin, who was boiling some coffee in a saucepan for breakfast, and whistling softly to himself as he stirred it. He would stop every now and then to listen when there was the least noise below, and when he had satisfied himself, he would go on, whistling and stirring again as before. When the coffee was done, Fagin drew the saucepan to the hob. Then he turned and looked at Oliver, and called him by name. But the boy did not answer, and was to all appearances asleep. Satisfied, Fagin stepped gently to the door, which he fastened. He then drew forth, as it seemed to Oliver, from some trap in the floor, a small box, which he placed carefully on the table. His eyes glistened as he raised the lid and looked in. Dragging an old chair to the table, he sat down, and took from it a magnificent gold watch, sparkling with jewels. At least 6 more were drawn forth from the same box, besides rings, brooches, bracelets, and other articles of jewellery of such magnificent materials and costly workmanship that Oliver had no idea even of their names. At length, the bright dark eyes of Fagin, which had been staring vacantly before him, fell on Oliver's face. The boy's eyes were fixed on his in mute curiosity, and although the recognition was only for an instant, it was enough to show that he had been observed. He closed the lid of the box with a loud crash, and laying his hand on a bread knife which was on the table, started furiously up.
"What's this?"
said Fagin.
"What do you want from me? Why are you awake? What have you seen? Speak out, boy! Quick for your life!"
"I wasn't able to sleep any longer, sir," replied Oliver meekly. I'm very sorry if I have disturbed you, sir."
You wasn't awake an hour ago,
said Fagin, scowling fiercely. No, indeed, replied Oliver.
Are you sure?
Cried Fagin, with a still fiercer look than before, and a threatening attitude. Upon my word, I was not, sir, replied Oliver, earnestly. I was not, indeed, sir.
Hush, dear child,
said Fagin, abruptly resuming his old manner.
Of course I know that. I only tried to frighten you. You're a brave boy, Oliver, a brave boy.
Fagin rubbed his hands with a chuckle, but glanced uneasily at the box, notwithstanding.
Did you see any of these, pretty things?
Asked Fagin. Yes, sir, replied Oliver.
Ah,
said Fagin, turning rather pale.
they're mine, Oliver, my little property, all I has to live upon in my old age. The folks call me miser, only a miser, that's all.
Oliver thought the old gentleman must be a decided miser to live in such a dirty place with so many watches, but thinking that perhaps his fondness for the Dodger and the other boys cost him a good deal of money, he only cast a deferential look at Fagin and asked if he might get up. Permission being granted him, he got up, walked across the room, and stooped for an instant to raise the water pitcher. When he turned his head, the box was gone. Presently, the Dodger returned with a friend, Charlie Bates, and the four sat down to a breakfast of coffee and some hot rolls and ham, which the Dodger had brought home in the crown of his hat.
Well,
said Fagin.
I hope you've been out working, dears.
Odd,
replied Dodger.
as nails.
Added Charlie Bates.
Good boys,
said Fagin.
What have you got, Dodger?
A couple of pocketbooks.
Replied the young gentleman.
Lined?
Asked Fagin with eagerness.
Pretty well.
Replied the Dodger, producing 2 pocketbooks.
And what have you got?
Said Fagin to Charlie Bates.
Wipes.
Replied Master Bates, at the same time producing 4 pocket handkerchiefs.
Well,
said Fagin, inspecting them closely.
they're very good ones. You have marked them properly, Charlie. So, the marks shall be picked out with a needle, and we'll teach Oliver how to do it. Would you like that, Oliver?
Oh, if you please, sir, said Oliver.
You'd like to be able to make pocket handkerchiefs as easy as Charlie Bates, wouldn't you?
Asked Fagin. Very much indeed. If you'll teach me, sir, replied Oliver. Master Bates saw something so exquisitely ludicrous in his reply that he burst into a laugh, which laugh, meeting the coffee he was drinking and carrying it down some wrong channel, very nearly terminated in his suffocation.
He's so jolly green,
said Charlie when he recovered, as an apology to the company for his impolite behaviour. When the breakfast was cleared away, the merry old gentleman and the 2 boys played at a very curious and uncommon game, which was performed in this way. Fagin placing a snuff-box in one pocket of his trousers, a note-case in the other, and a watch in his waistcoat pocket, with a guard chain round his neck, and sticking a mock diamond pen in his shirt, buttoned his coat tight round him, and putting his spectacle case and handkerchief in his pockets, trotted up and down with a stick in imitation of the manner in which old gentlemen walk about the streets. Sometimes he stopped at the fireplace, and sometimes at the door, making believe that he was staring with all his might into shop windows. At such times he would look constantly round him for fear of thieves, and would keep slapping all his pockets in turn to see that he hadn't lost anything, in such a very funny and unnatural manner that Oliver laughed till the tears ran down his face. All this time the boys followed him closely about, getting out of his sight so nimbly that it was impossible to follow their motions. At last, the Dodger trod upon his toes accidentally, while Charlie Bates stumbled up against him. And in that one moment, they took from him, with the most extraordinary rapidity, snuff-box, note-case, watch-guard, chain, shirt-pin, pocket-handkerchief, and the spectacle case. If the old gentleman felt a hand in one of his pockets, he cried out where it was, and the game began all over again. When this game had been played a great many times, a couple of young women came in, one of whom was named Bet and the other Nancy, and afterwards Oliver discovered that they also were pupils of Fagin's as well as the boys. Later, the young people went out, leaving Oliver alone with Fagin, who was pacing up and down in the room.
Is my handkerchief hanging out from pocket, dear?
Asked Fagin, stopping short in front of Oliver. Yes, sir, said Oliver.
See if you can take it, without me feeling it as you saw them do when we was playing.
Oliver held up the bottom of the pocket with one hand, as he had seen the Dodger hold it, and drew the handkerchief lightly out of it with the other.
Is it gone?
Asked Fagin. Here it is, sir, said Oliver, showing it in his hand.
Oh, you're a clever boy, dear,
said the playful old gentleman, patting Oliver on the head approvingly.
I never saw a sharper lad. Here's a shilling for you. If you go on in this way, you'll be the greatest man of the time. And now, I'll show you how to take the marks out of the handkerchiefs.
Oliver wondered what picking the old gentleman's pocket in play had to do with his chances of being a great man. But, thinking that Fagin, being so much his senior, must know best, he followed him quietly to the table. End of part 1. Involved in his new study. For many days Oliver remained in Fagin's room, picking marks out of the pocket handkerchiefs, but at length he began to languish, and entreated Fagin to allow him to go out to work with his two companions. So, one morning he obtained permission to go out, under the guardianship of Charlie Bates and the Dodger. The three boys sallied out, the Dodger with his coat sleeves tucked up, and his hat cocked as usual, Master Bates sauntering along with his hands in his pockets, and Oliver between them, wondering where they were going and what branch of manufacture he would be instructed in first. They were just emerging from a narrow court when the Dodger made a sudden stop, and laying his finger to his lip, drew his companions back again with the greatest caution. "What's the matter?" demanded Oliver.
Shh,
replied the Dodger.
do you see that old cove at the bookstore?
"The old gentleman over the way," said Oliver. "Yes, I see him,"
He'll do.
said the Dodger.
Prime plant.
Observed Master Charlie Bates. Oliver looked from one to the other with the greatest surprise, but could not ask any questions, for the two boys walked stealthily across the road and slunk close behind the old gentleman. Oliver walked a few paces behind them, looking on in silent amazement. The old gentleman had taken up a book from the stall, and there he stood, reading away, perfectly absorbed, and saw not the bookstall, nor the street, nor the boys, nor anything but the book itself. What was Oliver's horror and alarm to see the Dodger plunge his hand into the old gentleman's pocket and draw from thence a handkerchief, to see him hand the same to Charlie Bates, and finally to behold them both running away round the corner at full speed. In an instant, the whole mystery of the handkerchiefs and the watches and the jewels and Fagin rushed upon the boy's mind. He stood for a moment with the blood tingling through all his veins from terror. Then, confused and frightened, he took to his heels and dashed off.